Catherine Antos. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Planning and Sustainability here at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which means I have the honor of working with our Clean Energy Department and our housing team, as well as a few other departments. And so I'm so thrilled that you are here to join today's webinar, How Healthy Homes Are Tackling the Housing and Climate Crises. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. So if you'd prefer to not be recorded, you are welcome to turn off your video. We also ask that you put your questions in the chat. We will have a time at the end after we hear from our fantastic panelists to have a Q&A discussion. So please just put your questions in the chat. And my colleague, Kara Goodman, is monitoring that. So also if you're experiencing any IT issues, you can reach out to her directly for assistance. So I want to thank our co-sponsors of today's webinar, which is MassHousing, Citizens Housing and Planning Association, or CHAPA, and then also the Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, or MAGIC subregion, which is the communities that are west of Boston. And they provided funding for some of this research that we are going to hear about today. I also want to thank all of you for joining. In particular, I want to thank Paul McMorrow. He's the Director of Communications and Policy at MassHousing, and he was one of the ones who had the brainchild to have this conversation today. We were talking and he said, you know what, there's some amazing examples of projects that are providing affordable housing and doing so in a way that's really advancing our decarbonization future. We need to find a way to tell that story. We need to bring some of those examples to light. And so here now we have this wonderful group of panelists to share those lessons learned, and we have all of you. So thank you, Paul, for having this idea, and for everyone who's joined us today to hear about it. We also have participants joining from cities and towns, both within the MAPC region and beyond, from organizations that are working to advance housing and climate goals. And then also we have several guests joining us from state government, including DHCD, Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and many other agencies that are on. And then finally, we have joining us too, the Deputy Chief from the state's new Climate Office, or Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience. So really a great group of participants we have joining with us today. So today we're going to cover some overview of research that MAPC has done to date, and then we're going to hear from our panelists, who are developers who've worked in this area. And we're having this conversation because our climate goals and our housing goals are not efforts that can be addressed in isolation. So my colleague, Brooks Winner, who's a senior clean energy specialist here at MAPC, is going to provide an overview of research conducted by MAPC's clean energy and housing departments over the past few years. Then he and Alexis Smith, another MAPC colleague who's a principal housing planner, will moderate the panel in which we'll hear from developers who are bringing in high performance affordable housing to fruition. We'll be joined by Eliza Dada of E3 Development, Corey Fellows of POA, and Christina McPike from Wing Companies to share lessons learned from small, large, and adaptive reuse projects in Massachusetts. This work is grounded in MAPC's regional plan, Metro Common 2050, which is our vision for the greater Boston region. And one of Metro Common's action areas is climate change and mitigation, including a vision for a metropolitan Boston area that is highly energy efficient and has reduced greenhouse gas emissions to net zero. Another one of Metro Common 50's action areas is Homes for Everyone, which envisions a future in which all residents have safe and comfortable homes that they can afford in the communities that they prefer, regardless of family size or income. We also imagine a region that is less segregated, where our communities more closely reflect the demographics of the region as a whole. Finally, our vision includes homes that are deeply energy efficient, even producing electricity that can feed into the grid. I'm now pleased to turn it over to Brooks Winter, who is driving much of MAPC's work to achieve this vision. Thank you, Brooks.
Thanks, Catherine, and good afternoon, everyone. As Catherine said, I'm Brooks Winter. I'm a senior clean energy specialist and participated in the research that we want to share with you all today to frame up the panel and the discussion that we're going to have this afternoon. So why are we thinking about climate and housing? So MAPC really sees housing and climate as goals that are mutually beneficial and issues that are really inextricably linked to each other. We understand that there are changes in the landscape and common challenges with building highly efficient housing, including the specific effects on affordable housing. And we've seen a lot of movement on the legislative and regulatory fronts in the last couple of years, including a new stretch building energy code, fossil fuel demonstration pilot project, looking at fossil-free buildings, and also the housing choice legislation that passed in the last year or so. So we've heard from communities, including the communities in the Magic subregion that Catherine mentioned, that you all are interested in these topics, and so Magic reached out to us and asked us to look into this, to do some research about the intersection of housing and climate, and generously provided some funding for us to do just that. So before we start today, I want to just provide some shared definitions for us. We have a large and diverse audience, folks from all different sectors. So we just want to level set with some shared terminology here. So first, when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about deed restricting housing for very low and moderate income households at a cost that does not exceed 30% of their monthly gross income. And what very low, and moderate are spelled out for you there on the slides. Also important to note that all affordable housing is almost always built either with public subsidy or through public policy, for example, through inclusionary zoning policies at the local level. We'll also talk a little bit about the stretch code, and that's a building energy code at the Commonwealth wide level, statewide level, that communities can opt into. Over 300 Massachusetts communities are already opted into the stretch code, and that really emphasizes energy performance and is designed to result in energy efficient, cost-effective construction. Then there's the specialized code, new this year, that communities can opt into, that includes additional efficiency requirements above the stretch code, including, important for today's discussion, requiring passive house certification for multifamily buildings. And speaking of passive house, that's a rigorous and voluntary standard for energy efficiency in a building, which reduces the building's ecological footprint and results in ultra low energy buildings. So we get that question a lot. What do we mean when we say passive house? It's that standard that buildings are being built to. And then a couple other building energy terms that you might hear. A net zero energy building is one that produces as much renewable energy as it uses over the course of a year. And a fossil fuel free building is one that uses no fossil fuels like oil or gas for heating, cooking, or other purposes. So quickly, MAPC has been working sort of at the intersection of housing and climate for a while. We started working on energy codes in 2019, and we've been advocating for strong building codes that align with local housing and climate goals, and helping communities advocate for and adopt those codes. Our housing team started some research in 2020 looking at the fossil fuel free policies that communities were starting to pass, and looking at the potential impacts on local development and other issues related to those policies. In the spring of 2022, we we produced a summary of the draft of the stretch code and the specialized code and highlighted some of the issues that communities needed to be considering there and weighing in on. Back in 2021, we hosted a whole series of trainings for local officials, staff from community development corporations and other folks in the housing sector, focused on the intersecting issues of health, housing, energy, and equity. And then the research that we're really going to highlight here today was conducted last year through a series of conversations with housing developers, both market rate and affordable housing developers, who just to learn about their experiences with green buildings, and we'll share the key findings of that on the following slides. So we had that series of conversations with developers. We also did some research into papers and other studies looking at the costs and other considerations with green affordable housing. And here's what we found. First, we can't meet our climate goals without building decarbonization. And it's possible to decarbonize buildings without making housing cost prohibitive. We also found that affordable housing is leading on energy efficiency. The developers that we talked to operating in the affordable housing space all said that passive house construction in particular has become the industry standard, and that affordable housing almost always meets high efficiency standards to be competitive in state and federal funding programs. But they also flagged that in market rate development, those market rate developers aren't always subject to the same competitive funding, and thus don't necessarily need to pursue energy efficient design. And that's where communities can use the new building codes, the stretch and specialized code, to align the requirements for affordable and market rate housing. Developers also emphasize the importance of focusing on building envelope performance and passive house certification to ensure particularly that the savings are realized, and that we're ensuring ensuring affordability for low-income residents of those buildings, making sure that their utility costs are as low as possible. And they highlighted that there are multiple benefits to building, particularly to passive house design standards, but to high efficiency standards, including lower energy costs or energy burdens, better health for occupants and building residents, and climate resilience, so better resiliency to extreme weather. We also found that the price premium associated with passive house construction can impact affordable and market rate housing differently. So where you have, for affordable housing, higher costs in construction that we heard can range from between 2% more to 10% more than conventional construction. Those higher costs can result in extended timelines, needing additional subsidies to make projects pencil out, and sometimes fewer affordable units or more limited affordability within a building project to stay under sort of cost limits. So that's an interesting finding. There were concerns that some folks raised about the availability, reliability, and costs of certain technologies, particularly electric hot water systems for large-scale buildings, and backup power systems that don't require natural gas or other fossil fuels. And we also identified a number of regulatory shifts toward energy, clean energy, that really have to coincide with broader shifts in resources and expectations by all parties. I think that some developers perceived the operating savings or costs to be unknown and unpredictable, and so lenders shifting their expectations around underwriting is important. Developers also mentioned the importance to coordinate with and between utility companies, and that can be a cause for delay or complication in project timelines, and the importance of aligning the scale and timing of energy incentives to the sort of affordable housing finance system generally. So we also highlight some recommendations for state and local actions that I'll run through quickly here. So first, we recommend aligning and scaling funding resources to support broader passive house adoption. That could include increasing available incentives and subsidies to fully cover the higher costs. We have incentives in Massachusetts for passive house design, but leveraging additional funding through federal sources like the Inflation Reduction Act or state funding could help scale that up even further. And we want to emphasize that it's important to make those sort of additional subsidies and not just reallocating existing housing or energy funds. Also important to highlight improving coordination with electricity providers. I talked about that a little bit earlier, to make sure that the grid capacity is there as we're building out all electric construction. And then implementing equity measures to ensure that the benefits are distributed to communities that need them most, including contractor training programs to encourage women and minority-owned businesses to enter the field, focusing on building energy efficiency first so that residents see lower utility bills, and providing technical assistance for communities that want to adopt the specialized stretch code. Lastly, our recommendations for municipalities focus on adopting building standards that require greater efficiency. So that could include opting into the specialized stretch code, developing sustainable design standards or guidelines, as some communities in our region have done. And I think it's important to emphasize that this is a good place to start before exploring fossil fuel bans or other kinds of new building policies. Investing in housing planning and production tools that respond to local housing needs and address climate goals. That could be a housing production plan, an inclusionary zoning policy, 3A zoning, or working that into your economic development plans at the local level. And I think we highlight that clean energy and climate should be considerations and a big part of housing planning efforts at the local level. And then, adopting and or strengthening inclusionary zoning policies at the local level specifically. And then thinking about what financial resources your community can leverage to make green affordable housing easier to build. That could be using local funding, such as the Community Preservation Act, applying for state funding when possible through DOER, EEA, DHCD, et cetera, and or federal funding sources, which may be available through ARPA or the Inflation Reduction Act. So we are going to share these slides with participants and post them on our website after the webinar. We pulled together a list of resources that you can see on the slide here. But rather than talking through those, I want to get into our panel. We have a great group of panelists lined up for you all today. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alexis Smith, to introduce our panel.
All right, thanks, Brooks. As Brooks and Catherine mentioned, I'm Alexis Smith. I'm a principal housing planner with MAPC, and I am so excited to introduce our great panel of developers who have some really, really exciting and a great range of projects to share with us. Today we have Eliza Dada, who is the founder of E3 Development, Corey Fellows, who is the Vice President for Real Estate Development at Preservation of Affordable Housing, or POA, and Christina McPike, who is Director of Energy and Sustainability at Wind Companies. And I will start off by asking them to each just say another word or two about themselves and their role, and then jump right into their projects and to provide us with an overview of the project. What makes it interesting in terms of sustainability and affordability, and why they chose to pursue that route in this project. So with that, I will hand it over to Eliza.
Great, thank you. And hello, everyone. My name is Eliza Data. I am an affordable housing developer, and I've been working in this field for going on 25 years now. I founded my company, E3 Development, back in 2018. And over the past 5 years, I've been focusing on smaller scale mixed income housing projects in transit locations, typically in partnership with local stakeholders. The project I'll be talking about today, and you can see in the rendering here, is located in Somerville. It's called 31 Tuff Street. And it's the first passive house project that I've done. And I've been learning a ton about the process along the way. And I just want to say thank you to MAPC and MassHousing for inviting me to join the panel today. I'm excited to be part of this conversation and share some of my observations about what it means to pair a passive house approach with affordable housing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Tuff Street. So it's a new construction project. It's located in East Somerville, and it's going to create 16 units of affordable and workforce rental housing. The design is simple. It's a 3-story wood frame building. It fits in the neighborhood context, which is primarily triple deckers. It's got a great transit-oriented location. It's just 2 blocks from the new Green Line extension station in East Somerville that opened at the end of last year. And in terms of funding sources, the subsidy for the project came from a combination of city resources through the Somerville Affordable Housing Trust, through the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and MassHousing provided workforce housing funding as well. Unlike a lot of typical affordable housing projects, this one did not use any low-income housing tax credits because it's so small in scale. And in terms of where I am with the project, I broke ground last spring in 2022, and I'm scheduled to deliver later this year in the summer. And then here's a little more background about how the project came together and why I chose to go passive house on this project. So the site was formerly a city-owned parking lot that the city of Somerville made available for redevelopment through an RFP process. In my proposal and design for the project addressed a number of city priorities that were outlined in that RFP. So first and foremost, I'm providing housing it's affordable to households at a broad range of incomes. You can see the income limits on the slide here. So from 50% AMI all the way up to 100. And there's a focus on smaller scale units, so studios and 1-bedrooms. That's the majority of the units in the project. I'm also, as part of the project, creating a small pocket park, which was a really high priority for the neighborhood. So introducing new open space. And then finally, my proposal had a focus on sustainable design. So I proposed a passive house building. I proposed to go all electric and include a rooftop solar array. As I mentioned as part of my intro, this is my first passive house project, but it's certainly not my first time thinking about sustainable design. Sustainable design has been a focus for affordable housing development for many years now, and it's typically a priority or a scoring feature of the subsidies that we use to build our housing. So I'm familiar with and have done other projects with other types of sustainability certification programs such as LEED. But I've been learning about passive house, and I found it very appealing for a few reasons. One is that it's just it's kind of a very focused design approach that was easy to understand and made a lot of sense to me. It's about energy efficiency through controlling heating and cooling, through insulation and air sealing. I mean, it's just very it's punchy, easy to get your head around. It has clear economic benefits to the owner. So there's savings on operating costs through reducing energy consumption. Again, very easy to understand. And it also provides clear benefits to residents. So the thermal comfort that comes with the passive house design is great, and also indoor air quality. So all of these features align very well for this Tough Street project and the city of Somerville's priorities. In fact, the city had passed a new zoning ordinance in 2019 that emphasized a lot of these sustainable design principles and even provided a density bonus for net zero ready buildings, which was an advantage as I was putting together my design. So I chose to work with a small design firm, formerly known as Place Taylor, now Westwork, that was experienced both in the design and modeling for Passive House. And they've really kind of walked me through the entire process and educated me along the way, which has been great. And we just received our design certification through the Passive House Institute back in January, and we're very confident that we're going to meet the full certification for construction. So that's a little bit about Tufts Street. I'm going to pass things over to Corey now.
Thanks, Eliza. So my name is Corey Fellows. I'm with POA Preservation of Affordable Housing. POA is a national nonprofit housing developer, manager, and owner. We're based in Boston. I've been with the organization for a little over, I guess, 10, coming on 11 years now. And historically, the bread and butter of the organization, as the part of the name suggests, has been preservation, acquisition, rehab projects. We have increasingly gotten into more sort of, we refer to as transformational projects and new construction. And we saw this project, the loop at Mattapan Station, as a real opportunity to really hope, set a new baseline within our organization, within our portfolio, and hopefully a benchmark that others can follow going forward for energy efficiency. We are a mission-driven organization, obviously focused primarily on providing quality, affordable housing for residents over the long term, but another part of our mission is centered around energy efficiency, being responsible environmental stewards, and minimizing our footprint in terms of carbon emissions and consumption of fossil fuels. So one of our kind of baseline goals as an organization, which sort of meshes pretty neatly with Passive House, which, as Eliza said, is a very kind of straightforward, elegant standard, is we really want to our internal basis of design really has gotten to the point where it's de facto Passive House in many ways, in some cases approaching net zero. And so we found that if we're going to be doing that anyway, we may as well stretch and really try to meet the Passive House standard. So this project will be POA's first completed Passive House project. We can move into that. So this is 135 units in a 6-floor wood frame building. This actually, like the project before, was formerly a largely underutilized parking lot, which was owned by the MBTA, still owned by the T. We are operating under a long-term ground lease with the MBTA. We responded to an RFP issuance back in, I believe it was 2015, 2016, just to give folks an idea of how long it can sometimes take to bring these projects to fruition. And we're co-developing this with Nuestra Comunidad, which is a local community organization, with POA as the lead developer. We broke ground in November of 2020. We are now substantially complete in occupying and in the process of completing the back-end testing for the Passive House designations, which involves a lot of blower door tests and things like that to test the air sealing and so forth. Like a lot of these affordable housing projects, whether Passive House or not, this one featured kind of an alphabet soup of financing sources. I was looking back at the closing pro forma. I think there are 15 or 16 lines in the sources section. We're sort of making up for Eliza's project's lack of low-income housing tax credits by having two streams of those, 4% and 9%. There's also a host of other public sources, including, importantly, some grant and incentive funding for Passive House through the MassSave program and MassCEC. So I'll be happy to answer more questions and look forward to the discussion going forward, and I appreciate this opportunity. And I will hand it off to Christina.
Thanks, Corey. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina McPike. I'm the Unlike my other panelists, not on the finance and development side purely, I'm our Director of Energy and Sustainability at Wynn Companies. Wynn is a 52-year-old Boston-based, family-founded and operated real estate developer, property manager, and owner. We primarily develop, whether it's acquisition rehab, ground-up new construction, or historic adaptive reuse, like what I'm going to present today, low-income and mixed-income multifamily housing. We own about 12,000 units of mixed-income housing across the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. We're a little unique in that we've had an in-house sustainability department before my time. I've been at Wynn for 10 years, and we've had a whole team dedicated to our high performance and sustainability objectives for more than 15 years. And I'm extremely proud of the project I'm presenting on today. I think it is really a sort of a culmination of our 50-year history, and especially all of the work that we've done over the last 15 years to really kind of perfect the model and our own basis of design to deliver what is truly a unique all-electric historic adaptive reuse project. So on the next slide, you can see some details of the Stone Mill complex. Stone Mill was originally built in 1845. It's about 150,000 square foot old mill building. I kind of think of it as the mill for the other mills. They built Stone Mill in order to fix and maintain all of the machinery at all the other mills in Lawrence and scattered around the state. It's a beautiful old granite building, and it's a project that we have been involved in and with in some capacity for honestly 10 years. We finally were able to finance the project and close and started construction here last summer. We will be converting the vacant mill into 86 new apartments, mixed income, and a range of incomes, as you can see on the slide, 11 units at 30% AMI, 58 at 60% AMI, and 17 at market rate, a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. Similar to Corey's comment, a long slew of sources as needed to finance these complicated transactions. DHCD, low-income housing tax credits, MassHousing financing, and as well as capital magnet funds, housing stabilization funds, historic tax credits, home funds from the city of Lawrence, and very uniquely, a highly impactful grant from the Department of Energy Resources and the Attorney General's office through the Merrimack Valley Relief Fund, which we'll get more into during Q&A. While we're not pursuing the Passive House standard at Stone Mill, we did design the building basically using the Passive House standard as our framework. So we took the best practices, we took the energy objectives of that standard to design our building. We have to design the Stone Mill in accordance with historic tax credit requirements overseen by the National Park Service and the State Preservation Office, SHPO. And that means that we have some limitations and restrictions around the building fabric, i.e. the building envelope, so our walls and our windows and our roof. And I had to really keep all of that in mind as we pursued an all-electric design here. The all-electric design at Stone Mill, and Stone Mill will be our first all-electric building, was really inspired through the Merrimack Valley Relief Fund, which was created in response to the Columbia gas explosions in 2018. And a commitment by Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover, the communities most impacted by that explosion, that event, to phase out fossil fuels. So even though we're not technically required to comply with the stretch energy code, and we have a lot of sort of get out of jail free cards when it comes to historic preservation and energy code, we decided to really go all in here. The proposed design is going to result in a building that's 42% more efficient than a new construction building that would otherwise be built to energy code standards. So for a building originally constructed in 1845, we're extremely proud of that. Under construction about a third of the way through and hoping to deliver by the end of the year. So I think with that sort of brief high level general overview, I'll hand it back over for Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you, Christina and Corey and Eliza. Really, really exciting to hear about all three of your fantastic projects. And I'll start with the first question. As the resident energy nerd on the panel as moderator, curious if you can tell me a little bit more about the primary energy efficiency features. You mentioned some of them already in your intros, but were there particular challenges associated with pursuing a specific energy efficiency or energy component? And if so, how did you address those challenges?
I can jump in first. I alluded to this. We, as a historic adaptive reuse, have a plethora of unique challenges. So for starters, we established early on in partnership with the architectural team, with R.W. Sullivan, our MEP engineer, with New Ecology, our sustainability consultant, that this building, despite the challenges, was going to be all electric. And that meant that we needed to and wanted to invest as much as we could in getting the building envelope airtight and well insulated, similar to a passive house level envelope. But because it's historic, we had limitations on what wall area we could insulate and how deeply we could insulate that wall. And so National Park Service basically restricts exterior wall insulation to a 4-inch depth. So we basically have a 4-inch wall to deal with. One way we sort of enhanced the robustness of the R value of that wall was by very intentionally, despite cost add, using wood framing throughout the building instead of like each steel. So we eliminated that thermal bridging of the steel and the granite wall and used wood studs instead. And then the windows, which are about 30% of the wall area, these are big, massive old mill windows, had to match the 200-year-old wood frame double hung sashes that had been originally built in the building. We worked for many months iterating and trying to create kind of a unique custom window for the building. We had to sort of forfeit that direction, but have landed on a very good high performance triple glazed historic replica window. So between the wood studs, the maximum sort of R value exterior walls, and a triple glazed window, we were able to get the walls at Stone Mill to basically accommodate the responsible electrification of the HVAC system. And that's really important to us from a durability, comfort, and operating expense perspective. But that had to all be done, within the framework and what's allowable for the historic tax credit program.
That's great, Christina. And I think you did a great job demonstrating the point that I made in my presentation about the importance of focusing on the building envelope, which kind of makes everything else possible. Corey or Eliza, anything to add there about energy features and or challenges that you faced?
I just quickly add, the features are pretty similar to what Christina described, although obviously in this case it was new construction. So we didn't have the added degree of difficulty of having to navigate around those constraints. But high performance windows, it's a lot of glazing, and those windows actually came from a manufacturer in Colorado. And with the one little tidbit that came out of the construction process that was a little bit of a challenge was that with the difference in elevation, those had to sort of sit for a while. They had little balloons attached to them to indicate when they had reached the right level of depressurization before they could be installed. And it's just, I bring it up partly because it's an example of how exacting these standards really are. We were talking about this during our prep for this, that almost more so than the design standards themselves, it's really about the devil's in the details of the installation and making sure that all the trades who are involved at various stages understand the requirements and are coordinating with each other, and that the sequencing is right. Our team here was strong. We worked with the architectural team as well as our project architect, Delbert Construction, and then we had sustainability consultants, Building Evolution Corp, and Clear Result, that have been involved from the very start. And I would say that's one of the key lessons learned. You can't start too early, and you don't want to skimp on that investment, making sure that you budget for that, both for the front end work as well as the implementation.
Great. Thanks, Corey. Eliza, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add a few more details from the small project perspective. So we have all the ingredients of passive house that are typical for new construction. So lots and lots of insulation, lots and lots of good air sealing, high quality windows, but fewer of them, so less overall glazing, and then small, efficient systems for heating and cooling the building. So that's all in there. I guess for us, that one of the challenges was kind of how we fit solar on the roof, given how small the building is. We've got a roof footprint of about 4,700 square feet, so not very big, but we worked really hard to coordinate all the systems that usually pop up on the roof and managed to carve out room for about 60 panels, which ends up as a 26 kilowatt system, which is going to be providing about 90% of the building's energy usage. So even with small footprint, not much real estate, you can make a real impact coordinating all this work together.
Yeah, and I think that's really that's illustrative, Eliza, of you can maximize minimum space if you are reducing the overall energy consumption of the building up front, and that makes the solar panels go much further. That's great. Alexis, over to you for the next question.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to speak a little bit on the funding sources that helped you advance your objectives for this project, both in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of affordability. And just please speak a little bit about how the availability and the requirements of these resources impacted your project decisions. And let's kick it off with Corey.
Sure. So as I mentioned in my brief intro, we did have some passive house grant / incentive funding that was critical. Totaled about $500,000 in an overall construction. What's turning out to be an overall construction cost of over 50 million. But it was still key funding, partly because there was a feasibility stage of it, which enabled us to really kind of take that first leap and do real design work with the team, and sort of determine what was going to be feasible and what the next steps would need to be. And then the balance of that funding is coming in more at the back end. So there was that sort of passive house specific funding. And then I would say, it was also very important that our quote unquote, at least within the affordable housing world, more conventional funding partners really bought in and understood what we were doing, and that, MassHousing as the perm lender was able to really underwrite our utility costs, incorporating the passive house design so that we could capture the value of that and really leverage the value of that in terms of the debt sizing, which enabled us to do more with the building, deliver a better building for the residents.
Thanks. And Eliza, you mentioned previously that you didn't use some of the typical affordable housing sources because of the size of your project. Can you speak a little bit about what sources you used and how those helped you advance the project?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll start by putting a plug in also for some of the passive house incentive money that's out there through Mass Save. They require that you first do this feasibility study to show whether the project will generally work, and that it's not a lot of money. They cover the cost, and for me, it helped give me the confidence that it was going to work for the project. So that was helpful early stage money. The subsidy sources that we're using for Tough Street include state funding through DHCD, MassHousing's workforce housing program, and then a really generous contribution from the city of Somerville through their housing trust. They all had a priority for sustainable housing, but I would say that it was the city of Somerville's money, I think, really aligned with the ultimate goals of the project and what we're delivering. The trust's interest in, there's so much involvement from the city of Somerville in this project. It was formerly city-owned land, and the trust is putting in a significant chunk of subsidy. So all of the goals of the city kind of come through in the way they did their funding. So that I would say that really drove the passive house and the all electric decisions in large part.
Thanks. And Christine, I know you have some unique sources since this was a historic renovation. Anything you'd like to add about the funding sources and how those contributed to sustainability and affordability?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Obviously the combination of DHCD, MassHousing, and City of Lawrence home funds key to affordability. Total development cost here is about $50 million, or 30 million of hard construction costs. The electrification, the all-electric design, and the sort of related building envelope and ventilation design really followed and became possible thanks to a $2.88 million grant that we were able to apply for through a competitive RFP that's still open. I highly suggest people check out Department of Energy Resources. They actually just announced a new RFP last week, I believe. And that RFP, the one we responded to, again, was specific for the Merrimack Valley, and out of really incredible works from the AG's office and DOER. So that $2.88 million and being able to have that committed early at the time really of our LIHTC application, DHCD, gave us the confidence that we could pull this off, and add the costs associated with insulating all the walls instead of leaving the beautiful granite exposed, which might be the sort of baseline starting point. So that funding helped cover incremental costs for additional insulation, better windows, the VRF plants, and the heat pump water heater plant for the central domestic hot water.
Great, thanks. It sounds like in all three cases, it's been really critical to pursue that this doesn't happen by accident. You're pursuing funding at a really early stage to make sure that you have what you need in place to go after both affordability and sustainability. And now I'll hand it back over to Brooks.
Great, thanks, Alexis. So how did building to higher efficiency standards change your upfront development costs and ongoing operating costs? And what decisions or supports did you need, or what decisions did you make to bring this project successfully to fruition? Maybe we'll go to Eliza first here.
Sure. Yeah, so in thinking about this question, I went back and looked at that initial feasibility study that I did at the beginning of the project, because there were projections as part of that study that looked at what the cost premium might be to go from code to passive house. And so the projections in that report suggested that the premium might be 4 to 5% over a stretch code building for my project. And so I kind of did the math on what that 4 to 5% represents based on my kind of final total cost for the project. And it ends up being about $25,000 per unit in a premium. But I have to flag that amount was really influenced by the kind of pandemic era construction cost escalation that all of us who are building housing have been experiencing. So it didn't start off at that number. And then the mass save incentives that I mentioned cover about $4,000 a unit of that. So I mean, there is, I think, some premium, but to me it feels manageable. And certainly I think what all of these projects show is that you can build the subsidy stack to get there. So that's the cost side. The operational savings side is just a projection at this point, and I am really kind of interested and excited to see how the project ultimately delivers on these projected savings. But that same feasibility report targeted about a 50% cost savings for the operations of the building over stretch code. And then with that solar installation that I mentioned, that's going to bring that down even further. So there's real potential in terms of the operational savings side. But we need to get to the completion and operation stage to really understand what those are.
Yeah, I think as Corey said, the devil's in the details, but thanks, Eliza. And thanks for those specifics, the $25K per unit, and the information about the mass save incentives, how that fit in is really helpful. Corey, we'll go to you next, I think. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So in our case, again, just to briefly reset where we are with the project, we were substantially complete as of December, and are in the process of moving folks into the building. The jury's still out somewhat on the final costs. We're going through the cost certification process, and as Eliza alluded to, it's hard to filter out sometimes and isolate the passive house specific premiums within the context of this cost escalation environment that we've all been dealing with, and some of the supply chain issues and so forth. But it's appearing that we're probably in that 2 to 3 to 4% premium beyond what it would otherwise have been. And then going forward, as with Eliza's project, we'll see what the operational returns are. We've been projecting 30 to 40% below code. But again, we had already established some fairly aggressive baselines based on our design standards. So even with that, we're expecting some good returns there. We have a pretty active in-house design and technical team that is all about benchmarking and collecting data and sharing that data. So I'm assuming folks will be hearing from us and from our team going forward as we see how this performs, because part of what we really are trying to do here is demonstrate that this can really work, and that it's not necessarily rocket science. We also have rooftop solar with the project as well, so that will be an additional benefit to operations.
Great, thanks, Corey. Christina, anything to add in there?
Not too much to add. I think the common theme is that we'll have to wait and see on operating costs. We model a lot. We also own and operate many buildings, so we have some decent comparison sites. What's really difficult to predict are the energy markets, especially when you have wars in Europe and pandemics to boot. So where we saw 40 to 80% increases in electricity rates over the last couple of years, that'll make or break a budget. So that's a little scary, and we have to hedge for that. There are ways to do that. While we're modeling a 40% energy improvement, we're anticipating about a 10% energy cost savings compared to a gas building. So maybe just sort of food for thought when we talk about energy and carbon savings, it doesn't always equal cost savings.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting though, because if you had built to a lesser efficiency standard, then maybe your cost savings would be not cost savings at all. So
Absolutely.
I think that's really helpful. Great, and then another question on design choices. Corey, you alluded to this in your intro a little bit in terms of the benefits to residents of the design choices that you made, but what design choices did you make with resident benefits in mind, health, energy burden, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the recurring themes with on this topic is that in many cases, if not virtually all cases, passive house design is just good design, period. And Eliza alluded to this during her intro, that a lot of it is it's sort of resident comfort. It's been remarkable walking through some of the apartments since the project's been completed, on either very cold days or sunny days when you would normally have a lot of solar gain. You can really feel how sort of neutral it is, and it minimizes the constant adjusting of thermostats and things like that. We also have incorporated, and it's important, this is very important to do when you're talking about making the building envelope so tight. We have some fairly sophisticated ventilation systems which ensure good air quality, which is critical, particularly on a project of this scale. And then we get this question sometimes because with the loop and most of our other projects, particularly new construction, the residents don't pay any of the utilities beyond just what we refer to as the plug loads. So like televisions, personal appliances, and things like that. So sometimes we get the question, well, what's in it for the residents, when you're getting specific to the question of any cost savings coming from these utility efficiencies. And for us, a big part of that answer is that it helps us underwrite and finance a better project at the front end, and then we have more predictable operating costs and net income going forward that we can then put back into the project and into the other projects to further advance our mission. So that's, it's kind of couple of different levels to look at it.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, those are all great examples. Eliza, want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll add for my project, one of the kind of unexpected benefits of going with Passive House it was the air quality issue and the indoor kind of the health for residents issue. So the site that I'm working on is at the edge of a formal industrial area in Somerville, and there are these kind of like neighborhood-wide environmental issues. And so we've designed for that from an environmental perspective into the building. But my environmental consultant explained that having the Passive House standard would be like an added benefit for residents and would really ensure kind of the kind of best quality air within the unit. So that was an unexpected benefit.
That's great. And Christina, anything else to add?
Yeah, I again, sort of project specific, but while this is our first all electric historic adaptive reuse project, we did do another historic school conversion in Connecticut a couple of years ago, where we instead of installing gas boilers, installed the VRF system. And when you install a VRF system, you can choose between a sort of traditional 2-pipe non-simultaneous VRF or a simultaneous VRF, meaning you can in the first example, non-simultaneous, it's heating only or cooling only, and you sort of do this hard changeover. And simultaneous, you can have some apartments in heating and some apartments in cooling, depending on where they're at in the building and what their solar exposure may be, and so forth. And we learned that in the 2-pipe scenario, where it's either or, and you have a very tight building envelope, you can run into comfort issues. And so we went into this one knowing we wanted our residents to have year-round heating and cooling, especially as our shoulder seasons tend to grow in duration, and we have some spring-like winter days and some cooler fall days and so forth. So that was important for us, despite being a cost add, sort of a critical resident amenity or right, really, to have year-round access to heating and cooling.
Yeah, thanks, Christina, and thanks particularly too for that reframing at the end from an amenity to a right. I think, yeah, particularly as the climate changes and our buildings change, maintaining a comfortable temperature, regardless of whether that's requiring heat or cooling, is super essential. Alexis, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So the kind of looking ahead, with every project we build, we're continually evolving our best practices and our goals. I'm curious if there's anything that you would have liked to have included in this project that we've been talking about, or would like to include in future projects that you were not able to include here, either because technology wasn't available or because it didn't make sense financially, or for whatever reason. And I think, Christina, can you kick us off here?
Sure. Two things come to mind. First is solar. We've developed a few megawatts of solar across our portfolio. The stone mill has a beautiful, very important historic slate roof that we could not add solar to. So unfortunately, we don't have renewables here. But honestly, regardless of solar, what I would have loved to make work here, but unfortunately didn't, and hope to on the next one, in large part thanks to Corey and POA's leadership, is battery storage. So we have a diesel generator for emergency power only, really for a fire pump. And battery systems are a way to mitigate the rising cost of electricity and demand charges. And that's one of those unknowns that will go into operating this building. We're not exactly sure what our peak kilowatt demand is going to look like at the stone mill a year from now. Having a battery in place would not only help with resiliency, but also help us mitigate demand charge management and demand response, potentially participate in demand response. So hopefully on the next one, we'll figure that one out.
Great, thanks. Eliza, anything to add?
Yeah, so for the Tough Street project, the design team early on submitted the project to be in an affordable housing pilot through the International Living Futures Institute, I think it is, ILFI. They have a living building challenge, which as I understand it, targets an even higher level of sustainability than passive house alone. So we were in this pilot, and as part of that, we explored the possibility of going zero carbon on the project as well. So kind of thinking about the materials. And I think we might have been able to get there, but at the end of the day, we had a budget gap because of rising construction costs. And so we had to make some value engineering decisions, and that was an additional goal we weren't quite able to meet with this project. We got VE'd out. The passive house features, it's interesting, they're so kind of built into the design in a new construction building. They were harder to VE out, so they stayed firmly in, which is a good thing.
We'll look forward to in a year, we'll have to all get back together again and hear how you tackled these challenges in your next projects. And again, kind of still looking towards the future. We've got a lot of different folks in the audience here, developers, but also state policymakers, local leaders. So I'm curious to hear from all of you what recommendations you might have that would in terms of policy, technical access, anything that would support housing production that meets both affordability goals and decarbonization goals at scale. How we elevate the work that you've been doing beyond a project level. And so I will start with Corey.
Yeah, I think in this, I'm thinking, kind of going back to the last question, actually, sort of what were any regrets? Not that was the way it was worded, but what we wish we could have done. And I think first of all, it's remarkable, and I think we're fortunate to be in an environment in Massachusetts where DHCD and the other key public housing funders have really bought into this and are really incentivizing and virtually requiring passive house as kind of a baseline standard, and putting their money where the policy is as well, and showing a willingness to fund those projects, even though there have been cost pressures across the industry. I think we'd love to get to a point where we can do truly fossil fuel free buildings as just a matter of course. We're not quite pulling that off at the Loop at Mattapan. HVAC is all electric, but we are using gas to heat water. We also have an emergency generator for the second elevator that is fuel powered. We are, with another of our projects that's in the pipeline, in the process of working toward a truly all electric project, which will include backup power. And it's sort of a combination of budget pressures, budget factors that play into that, as well as the sort of local permitting and fire and code and things like that, and just building greater acceptance for things like that, without having to feel like it's something very novel that you have to go and sell. So we really, I'd say, as kind of an overarching goal, we're really just trying to demystify these things and show that they can be done in sort of a relatively routine way. And we kind of view this project as a potential showcase for that, because it is fairly high profile. It's transit oriented. It's a very busy MBTA transit hub with bus and trolley service and commuter rail nearby. It's called the Loop partly because the bus loop continues to run around the property. And then we also have direct access to the Neponset River Greenway, which is an important urban recreational amenity. And so we really are hoping that this will be a model that folks can look to going forward. And I'll look forward to hearing what the other panelists and attendees here have to say about possible ideas and things to work on going forward.
Yeah. I'll kick it over to Christina. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Corey, we're very lucky to be in Massachusetts. We have incredible leadership and support across our state agencies, and great programs, and frankly, amazing codes. And I work on projects in New Jersey and Ohio and South Carolina and Maine, and every state's a little different, and Massachusetts is by far leaps and bounds ahead of the rest. So we're very lucky in that way. And I think we're seeing that translate into really high performance new construction projects like the Loop, like 2 or 3 Passive House certified new construction projects that we'll be closing on and starting later this year in Swampscott and Shrewsbury and Braintree, projects that we're really proud of. What we don't see a lot of are decarbonizing existing buildings and decarbonizing occupied acquisition rehab projects, and the resources necessary to do those kinds of projects. So I am the sort of climate sustainability person here. I'm a developer also, but 2/3 of all the buildings that exist today will still exist in 2050. So we need to figure out what to do with our existing buildings also. And I think that means, creating similarly robust and healthy resources to decarbonize existing buildings, just like we have for producing and preserving new affordable housing. So things like the Zero Carbon Renovation Fund and other efforts like that folks between MCAN and MAPC and LISC and others are advocating for in real time.
Yeah, I was so excited when I saw that your project was going to be included here, because highly sustainable renovations are just such a challenge. So it's great to have a concrete example of that. Let's see, Eliza, any last thoughts?
Yeah, so I would add that I am hopeful that as we kind of deliver more of these projects in Massachusetts and we can understand the data coming out of the operational side and what savings are, that understanding that information and sharing that information and buying into that information can help us leverage more resources for affordable housing. We are in this tough environment right now where operating costs are escalating, in part because of utilities, but also for other reasons. We've got interest rates rising as well. So we're getting squeezed, and the amount of private capital we can leverage for affordable housing is going down, and subsidy needs are going up. But if we can kind of rework that equation a little bit through some of these energy and cost savings, that may help us get back to a better place in terms of funding new projects or kind of rehab projects. So that's my thought.
Thanks. And I think now we're going to transition to some questions from the audience, and I think Brooks is going to kick that one off.
Yeah, so we've been getting some good chatter in the chat. Overall, seems like folks have been really thrilled to hear about your projects. So thanks again, Eliza and Corey and Christina for sharing that and for answering all those questions. So I saw an interesting question in there that some of you all have already touched on a little bit, but was sort of asked explicitly, why did you decide to build passive house? Like why was that the standard that you wanted to build to?
I mean, I can jump in again. I just, as I outlined in my intro, passive house made a lot of sense to me from a design perspective. It's a simple approach that has to do with a few key building details. So it's very understandable from that perspective. It has clear economic benefits. I mean, some of those have to be proven out in the operational phase, but they're very understandable as well. And then these additional benefits to tenants of air quality and comfort. It was that combination that made me choose that, along with wanting to align with the city of Somerville's priorities on all those fronts.
Great. And Corey?
Yeah, I would just add, pretty similar rationale for us. And as I mentioned in my intro, we sort of recognized, among other things, that our sort of baseline design standards had already crept pretty close to what passive house it is. And without taking anything away from things like LEED, passive house is it's performance based. It's about the performance of the building. There are some great things that come along with LEED and some of the other programs and designations, but one thing that we really like about passive house is that it is very straightforward. It's all about quality, careful design and construction, and it has very tangible benefits economically and for, for resident comfort.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Now,
Corey.
I'm going to jump in with a question for Eliza. Someone had asked about the density bonus for Passive House in Somerville. Did you take advantage of it? How did that impact how the project penciled out? Again, a potential takeaway for some local policymakers in the room here.
Yeah, so there were in the new zoning ordinance that Somerville put out for the kind of district that my project sits in, there I'm calling them density bonuses. They allowed a kind of a smaller average unit size within the building for two. There are two tracks. One was I think net zero ready, and the other was for 100% affordable housing. At the end of the day, so I was kind of like on both tracks for a while. At the end of the day, I took advantage of the affordable housing overlay that came later because it gave me a few more benefits. But I thought that was a creative way within the zoning ordinance to promote the kind of project that I was producing, which is, workforce housing with smaller apartments in a small kind of neighborhood scale. So I thought that was a great feature of the new ordinance.
And so in the case of the affordable housing overlay, which it sounds like what you were ultimately ended up using, how did that play out? Did it mean you were able to build more affordable units than otherwise? Did it help out with your per unit costs? Yeah, I was able to get more units in the same footprint than I would have been able to if it hadn't been affordable housing. The affordable housing overlay had the added benefit of giving me some dimensional relief as well. That also helped me fit the pocket park in with the apartment building. Great. It's great to hear that there's a direct result of a couple additional affordable units in the pocket park that came out of that. Let's see, Brooks, you want to handle the next question?
Yeah, so I think this one was primarily for Corey, but maybe I'll just open it up to everybody as well. Corey, you talked about how the project is all electric for HVAC, but heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. But you went with gas for hot water. Can you talk a little bit about that decision making? And then Eliza and Christina, if you want to chime in on some of the design choices, particularly around hot water, that's something that we've heard from developers can be a challenge, particularly for larger scale buildings.
Sure, and I'll give the standard, development VP disclaimer that I'm not super technical on this. But I do know that when we were going through the long involved process of kind of figuring out what our HVAC system was going to be, there was a lot of back and forth around the gas question, and we were adamant that we didn't want gas stoves, we didn't want gas fired HVAC, but just sort of looking at the kind of the whole matrix of pros and cons and what we needed to make work for this particular building, including the fact that we had we're working within the constraints of a site that's in the middle of a transit hub, and so we had some dimensional challenges there too, and there were some broader, bigger picture design and engineering decisions that kind of trickled down through the rest of the project. So at the end of the day, that's sort of where we landed. And as Eliza mentioned, it's gotten to the point where when you get to your standard VE stage, value engineering, for folks who aren't familiar with that phrase, which is basically a euphemism for cutting stuff so you can make your numbers work. We've gotten to the point where Passive House itself is so those design elements and principles are so baked into just good design that it's really not easy to just pull that out. But when you get to more discrete things like what's your fuel source for your hot water, or what kind of a ventilation system are you going to design and install, those things tend to be a little bit more a la carte. But yeah, I mean, I think it was there are always trade-offs on these projects.
Yeah, and I actually wrote this down, and maybe I'll quote you on this in the follow-up to the webinar, Corey. I loved your Passive House design is good design, period statement. So thanks for that. Eliza or Christina, anything else to add on the hot water front?
This is our first building that we're going all electric on the domestic hot water front. We have a couple of passive house new construction projects that are closing soon that at the moment have gas domestic hot water, and in large part, as we've all talked about, these projects take a long time, and that design could, and this is a terrible answer, but the design could be from a couple of years ago, and we sort of stuck with that design. And as the design has evolved and costs continue to escalate, the appetite to change the design to a more expensive alternative sort of becomes even more difficult to do. So it was helpful at Stone Mill. We started out on day one, this is an all electric building. There was no sort of gray area there.
Yep.
There was a little bit of gray area on projects a couple of years ago. Moving forward, there isn't. Our projects that have started in the last 18 months are all electric. It's sort of the more vintage 3-year-old projects that may still have gas domestic hot water, and the new stretch code is certainly going to play a role there as well. And the FIAS standard helps in some ways too, that even if you have a gas domestic hot water plant, they require sizing your electric gear for future electrification of that load. So all of these buildings are basically prepared for the technology for large scale commercial heat pump water heaters to sort of meet us where the demand is in our building profiles.
That's great. Thanks, Christina.
And I'm gonna follow up with a question kind of on messaging for all three of you. One of the attendees was curious if you all had encountered the critique that if you pursue net zero or passive house, that will make housing unaffordable. If you encountered that in your projects or in feedback, and then how you responded to that.
I guess I'll start off. I mean, we didn't really encounter it on this particular project, and part of that is that we're in Boston, which not to say that, that those concerns don't come up in Boston, but I think we've seen it, or questions like that come up a little bit more in places like the Cape and other areas. I would say, I mean, my response as number one, as we're kind of collectively demonstrating, the premium, the front end premium is really not as much as I think many people assume, and hopefully that delta will continue to shrink. I also think there are much bigger drivers of cost that could be addressed by municipalities and others, including the extent to which parking requirements drive design decisions. This project's unique, among other things, in the fact that we've got minimal off-street parking. We have the benefit, obviously, of being literally on top of a transit station. It's transit-oriented development. But initially, we had to have a very active, lengthy discussion with the city and other stakeholders about off-street parking, and this was before the city changed its policy around minimum off-street parking for affordable housing. But I think things like that can be rethought, and hopefully, as more of these projects are done, can make those things a little bit more standard.
Yeah, absolutely. Eliza or Christina, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll second a lot of what Corey said. I mean, at least for this project that I'm doing in Somerville, I didn't get any pushback for that reason. In fact, the city was promoting all of these things that I included in the project, and they were really happy that I could get there. I totally agree with what Corey was saying about the other cost drivers in affordable housing. I don't think these smallish premiums we're talking about with passive houses what is making housing expensive. It's the lack of multifamily zoning and all the time it takes to get a project approved. It's the parking requirements that often go unutilized or underutilized, and in some communities, really onerous design requirements. I think those drive costs more than what we've been talking about here today.
Fantastic points. Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. And, I was really excited to see we had over 300 people sign up for this webinar, 160 people on it at the max, and a very diverse audience, including big cities from other states and some small towns in the region and beyond. So, you all just touched on some of those cost drivers. What recommendations would you have for small towns that are trying to tackle housing production, housing affordability, and are also focused on their climate goals? Maybe even just like one good place to start.
I can jump in sort of from personal experience, working with a lot of different municipalities who are curious and, building capacity themselves to sort of select what is the standard. Is it passive house? Is it net zero? And really still trying to sort of define those terms and what the objectives are. But leaning on the existing sources, both Eliza and Corey mentioned MassSave Passive House. They offer a $5,000 feasibility study. It's pretty easy. It's a quick way to really kind of quickly set the course for a project, and it's paid for, by MassSave, assuming you're in a National Grid or Eversource territory. And if you have a municipal electric company that doesn't participate in MassSave, maybe consider encouraging the muni to create sort of mirror the MassSave offerings so that developers in your town can sort of benefit the same that they would in a community that does have those kinds of incentives. But that feasibility stage very, very, very early on in design can play a huge role in getting owner and developer buy-in, but also really just get the design started out right from the get-go. And that's a way to kind of get the necessary buy-in, which is half the battle. Even before you design and price this out, it's just everybody getting on the same page, using the same terminology and agreeing with the sort of vision for the project.
And I would just very, very, very quickly add that, it's been my experience and our experience on smaller projects that are in our pipeline right now that are underway, including project on the Cape that's going to be passive house, basically 40 units. That local communities, this really can become a point of pride for municipalities and other folks at the local level to, if you've got a local housing authority or housing trust or the town itself. We found that people have really, once they kind of understand the basics of it and understand what it means for the project and for the building and for the residents, people get excited about it and it becomes a point of pride, and they start using passive house as part of how they refer to the project. So I think there's an opportunity to leverage that as well.
Yeah, and just I'll take that thread and pull it a little further. So a lot of the affordable housing that all of us work on in the state typically relies on some sort of local funding in addition to the state and federal resources. And so I think what Corey was just talking about, the way that local funding sources, whether that be CPA or other sources of funds, assign their priorities for funding could help inform how projects proceed in that community. So I sit on the CPC in Newton, for example, and we recently just aligned our funding priorities to match the cities in terms of, sustainable building design. And certainly my experience in Somerville was very much what they were doing across the board. So I think that's a great way to promote more of this high level, sustainable, affordable housing.
Yeah, that's great, Eliza. And I think the Somerville example that you provided is one of the best that I've heard of a community really aligning its housing goals and its climate goals. So with that, I think we'll wrap the panel. I'll turn it back over to Catherine Antos to take us out. But I just want to say a deep gratitude and many thanks to all three of our panelists. It's been a really great discussion. So thank you for being here and sharing your projects with us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much to Eliza, Corey, and Christina for explaining three very different and very important projects. I want to echo the messages that were in the chat that we thank you for creating proofs of concept that we can do more to advance building decarbonization and multi-residential affordable housing. We did get several questions in the chat that we didn't have time to get to, but one of them is passive house just about housing? Is it just about residential? And the good news is no, it's not. Those same standards apply to other types of buildings as well. So yeah, I agree. We're definitely going to use Corey's quote that passive house is good design, and that means it's something that doesn't get value engineered out. If you're like me, you probably want to listen to some of this discussion again because we'll get even more through it. So I just want to share with everyone that we will, by the end of the week, be sending out the recording from today's webinar and also the slides that Brooks went through earlier, which included a lot of links to great resources if you want to learn more about this. So thank you everyone for joining today, and we look forward to having you join us in a future MAPC webinar. Thank you so much.